transgender female athletes in women's sports. Only 18% of the country says that they should be, in fact, allowed to participate in women's sports. Compare this to the opposition. I mean, my goodness gracious, 79%. You rarely get 79% of the country to agree on anything.
God bless you, Mr. President.
Give us a little behind the scenes of yesterday. Certainly we don't usually see scenes of President Trump, surrounded by kids, surrounded by female athletes the way that it was. I mean, just these images themselves, I think that I kind of feel like they're already iconic.
They really are. And, I was telling you earlier, there's so many iconic scenes of this president, but this is one that is going to live on. We have people from the left cheering this photo and actually kicking themselves. Why did we take such a stupid position for so long and continue to, and give President Trump the opportunity to save women's sports, which is going to live on forever? And of course, they're obviously still committed to it. But one of the mainstream media sources cited today that this is an 80% popular position as of yesterday. Like, that's not an old poll. That is as of yesterday, 80% of Americans approved of this. And so we knew at the White House, we had to get these women in. We had to get these moms in. We had to get these girls in because people wanted to be there. These are not just random people. These are people who have been affected by men in sports. And these are people who have fought. They were on bus tours. They have gone into Congress. They have written letters to the NCAA. They have showed up to the NCAA conferences. These are people who have put blood, sweat, and tears into this. Some of them are paralyzed because they've been paralyzed by a male. And so, you know what? This day is for them. And the White House is the people's house. And so we brought in women in order to say, today's for you.
And so I think people kind of understand the broad swaths of it, but I wonder if you could walk us through the details on how enforcement of this will work. So I understand that the authorization comes through Title IX, basically this idea that that anyone will not be discriminated on the basis of sex. And so using that framing, the idea then is to say, well, this is a form of discrimination because you've got, for example, swimmers like Riley Gaines or Paula Scanlon who were forced to share a locker room with a biological male. This is obvious discrimination and probably a criminal violation if you look at it from that perspective. So when it comes to organizations like the NCAA, like these schools, like Division I, et cetera, all the other things out there, how will that look like in terms of actual enforcement from the administration?
Yeah, and guess what? It's already happening. So we made this announcement yesterday, and today already there are investigations ongoing into San Jose State University, into the University of Pennsylvania, where Leah Thomas swam, and into the Massachusetts Athletic Group, basically. So how this is going to look is there's two different things. So one, there's Title IX. Title IX governs education. If you take $1 of federal funding, you cannot discriminate on the basis of sex in your educational programs. And guess what you're doing when you don't allow women's sports? If you say, hey, guess what, women, we'll give you your sports, but you've got to compete against men, or you've got to change with men. That is not giving women equal dignity. That's not giving them equal safety. That's not giving them equal opportunity. Women are built differently than men. Women are equal to men, but they are not the same. And so to strip away women's opportunities to saying you have to compete with men who are stronger than you, who are faster than you, who are taller than you, who have a longer wingspan than you, then that's not equal opportunity. And so you are not allowed to have federal money. And so we're going to enforce that. And like I said, that's already happened. But there's a whole private sector piece, too. There are women who are competing in cycling events, women's powerlifting, even for younger kids who are doing it in sort of rec leagues, things like that. And we're not going to rest by letting those sports have men brutalize women either. And so what we're doing is at the Olympics, we're using the Secretary of State to make sure that we've got fair rules at the Olympics that protect women's sports. We're working with state attorneys general to enforce sex discrimination laws at the states. We are bringing groups in to hear the stories of women athletes. There's a full all of government approach to this issue to make sure that women are treated equally in this country.
And this is fantastic because this is just like we've seen with Doge and Elon Musk. The idea is to follow the money by tracking the money, whether it's federal, whether it's state, whether it's grants, whether it's whether it's these loans to students, et cetera, that of course flow through the colleges in many cases, or flow through the Department of Education, which also, by the way, is on the chopping block in terms of Linda McMahon and everything that she's going to be working on over there. It really comes down to this. These programs were funded by federal tax dollars through the Biden administration and even starting in the Obama administration. And the way to ensure compliance is exactly that. Starve them of the federal tax dollars, starve them of anything coming from the taxpayer pocket that has to do with this. And guess what? You will then be able to ensure compliance. Why is it that other administrations couldn't seem to figure this out?
Yeah, not only did they not figure it out, but they basically went the other way. So day one, President Biden said that he thought the word sex meant gender identity. And so everything that was going to be sex segregated, so whether that's locker rooms, bathrooms, prisons, rape shelters, you name it, they were going to treat a man who asserted that he was a woman as if he was a woman. So this has led, of course, to all sorts of abuses against women. I don't even have to describe what happens when you lock a woman in with a man in a prison, especially people who are trans identifying in prison. More than half of them have sexual assault crimes on their record. So the complete abuse and the complete turning away of common sense, of truth, biological reality, but also of basic dignity for women is something that is completely perplexing, not only to you, not only to me, not only to your listeners, but to the vast majority of Americans. For something to be 80% popular is almost unheard of. Like, I don't think 80% of people think we landed on the moon. There's very few things you get 80% agreement on, but the fact that women and men are different and exist and should have their own sports, that's an 80% issue.
Well, and the idea, I think, too, when you talk about the trans issue from an individual level, I think people have a lot of different opinions on that. I know where I stand. I know where a lot of people stand. But when it comes to these federal policies and federal dollars, whether that's going to these organizations or like what Pete Hegseth is doing in the military, by the way, which was something that President Trump did in the 45 administration as well, a policy, it's understanding what is the purpose of these organizations? What is the purpose of a female women's sports programs? It is, of course, to facilitate athleticism and development of the student athletes and to provide for that. It is not for the social experimentation. And just on another level, when you're talking to families, and I'm sure you met with we could see the mothers that were there who were with some of the younger student athletes. There's a real worry there of what could potentially happen in one of those locker rooms when you have a biological male. And I think that's another huge part of this that I think people certainly are missing, that it's not about banning people, it's about protecting young girls.
It really is. But even beyond that, I think we've come to this point where women are expected to justify their need for single-sex spaces. Well, there's only a few men, or, they're not mostly that athletic or whatever. What they're doing is saying, hey, women, you don't deserve something unless you can justify it. And Biden ended up basically saying that. So he said that women and gender identity were the same thing. But then he said in his proposed athletics regulation that, okay, maybe we'll let the women have their sports, but you have to justify it. You have to show that it would be required for safety or, just some other thing. How about this? How about women deserve single-sex sports and single-sex spaces, period? Period. That we are at a point in the history of our country where women don't have to explain themselves, and it's okay to just have single-sex sports and single-sex spaces. And that's really what this is about, is women shouldn't have to prove themselves, justify themselves. This is something that women are entitled to, and it's a good thing. Women who participate in sports have a higher self-esteem, lower pregnancy rates, obviously, like lower obesity rates, all sorts. They're able to excel in school. There's all sorts of benefits that come along with this, which is why Title IX didn't address, hey, you should be able to have whatever major you want, which women should, but it's also you should be able to equally participate in these types of extracurriculars.